U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says the era of self-regulation is over for Silicon Valley. Democrats have warned Amazon, Apple, Facebook and Google that the antitrust investigation is coming. Representative David Cicilline is leading the charge. He says it's time for laws from the 1800s to finally be updated.
These are statutes that were written mostly during the time of the railroad monopolies. It's a very different economy today. So one of the things we're going to have to look at is, do our antitrust statutes today meet the needs of the 21st century economy? Is price the only relevant consideration? I think that's one of the things we have to look at. But no one should think all of this is free. This is data which is being collected, used and sold. It's also preventing competitors from entering the marketplace, which typically will drive down prices. So the question about anti-competitive conduct and what it means to the consumer is a real issue.
Tackling Silicon Valley is clearly popular these days. Donald Trump and the Republicans claim the likes of Facebook and Google have a, quote, anti-conservative bias. The president has criticised Apple for manufacturing outside the United States, and he has incorrectly accused of Amazon of abusing the U.S. Postal Service. Democrats, meanwhile, slam the social media companies for not doing enough to stop fake news. Now they're launching this antitrust investigation and threatening new legislation to rein them in. At the same time, the Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Justice have struck a rare deal. The FTC will be keeping an eye on the likes of Amazon and Facebook, while the Department of Justice, the DOJ, will be watching Apple and Google. Of course, across the Atlantic, the EU has been a thorn in the side of Silicon Valley for years, and it shows no sign of letting up. Maureen Olhausen is the former commissioner at the FTC, and she's now a partner at Baker Bott's antitrust practice. Maureen, fantastic to chat to you again and to have you on Quest Means Business once again. Is it true when you hear someone saying that the kind of laws that we're using right now date back to the 1800s? That's what we're using to tackle Silicon Valley today. I mean, that's a travesty, surely.
Well, the laws are written very generally to stop any competitive conduct or agreements. And there's been 100 years of court interpretation and agency enforcement doctrine to update those laws to the modern day. So there's been major enforcement actions against companies like Microsoft, IBM before that. So the antitrust laws have kept up, though I think there is a question about whether they need additional powers or changes to the current antitrust laws.
I mean, you made that point the last time you were on the show. You said, look, the FTC can only act with the teeth or the bite that Congress has given it right now. Do you think when you look at the noises that we're hearing from both the Democrats and the Republicans here, that we could actually see the two sides come together and give more powers to regulators? Because surely otherwise we're not going to see real potent progress here on greater regulation.
Well, I disagree that we necessarily need more regulation. I think the question is there any competitive conduct happening in the markets today? Do the agencies have the right level of enforcement and the right tools to challenge it? And then if there is a decision that there's anti-competitive conduct and somehow it can't be reached, I think at that point is where the discussion is necessary to say, do the antitrust laws need to do something different? But I don't think we're at that point yet. I think we're still trying to figure out those first two questions.
Do you see anti-competitive behavior when you look at these big companies, the Amazons, the Apples, the Facebooks, the Googles?
Well, not necessarily, because one of the things we need to have a clear handle on is what is actually anti-competitive. If you're competing hard and you're offering consumers the best choices, the best options, you're bringing out new products, better prices, more convenience, and you end up winning the race, that's not illegal under American antitrust law, and I would be concerned if that was illegal. But on the other hand, if you have companies who are taking actions to keep competitors out of the market, not by competing the hardest, but by engaging in some kind of exclusionary behavior that doesn't benefit consumers, that's where antitrust agencies should focus their attention.
It's quite fascinating to me because if I look at the approach the Europeans have taken, they've tackled Google, Alphabet time and time again, and they've pushed for this and they've actually fined them, and yet the United States has been on the back foot on this and hasn't. So is there a mismatch? Are you saying actually that the Europeans are getting it wrong, or actually is the United States, to your point earlier on this show, lacking bite?
So there's a different law in Europe. It's called the abuse of dominance standard, whereas in the U.S., we are looking at whether there is anti-competitive conduct, and there are slightly different standards. I think one of the questions is whether there are negative impacts for consumers, not just competitors, but for consumers that the U.S. antitrust laws can't reach. And I think that's where the conversation should be focused.
So what we saw in the markets yesterday was $130 to $140 billion of market cap wiped out for some of these big tech players. Even in our wildest imaginations, any kind of fine that's coming is going to be nowhere near that size, quite frankly. And even if it does come, there are those that look at this and say, look, it's going to take years. Would you agree that action, affirmative action to do something about this could take years, if it even comes?
If there is an enforcement action, if any of these changes or signals lead to any kind of investigations, then complaints, then litigation through the courts, it will take several years. Now, Congress is considering, some members of Congress, Mr. Cicilline in particular mentioned this, they are considering whether the antitrust laws should be changed. I think that also would take several years. But antitrust law is not the only factor that affects competition in the market, and even the hearings in the House are focusing on this. Are there other regulations that might be dampening a competition that can be changed more quickly rather than bringing a large antitrust enforcement action or trying to get the antitrust laws themselves changed? Are there other types of regulation that need to be examined as well?
Wow, this conversation just convinced me there's a huge buying opportunity in some of these names. Maureen, wow. Thank you so much for that. Maureen Olhausen speaking there.
Pleasure.
Thank you for joining us.